Good morning, everyone. Morning, lovely to see you all. Hope you all slept well. Hope you enjoyed the dinner, those of you who's joined us for dinner last night. So welcome to day 2 of our Decolonising and Diversifying Biosciences Education Symposium. So really lovely to see you all. We had, I think we had a really great day yesterday, some really rich discussions, some really nuanced discussions, and I think we've all learned quite a lot already from this meeting, which is great. So we've got another day of talks today with a couple of interesting bits and pieces. We have got a couple of changes to the programme last minute. So unfortunately, Carol Ibe, who is due to talk at 11, isn't going to be able to talk. She's not well, so we send Carol our best wishes, and also Isaiah, our co-organiser, is unwell today. So what we're going to do, so we're very aware that trains are a little chaotic, and a lot of you have got to disappear. Trains been rescheduled. So what we're going to do is the workshop at the end of the day. We're going to sort of break that into 2 pieces. So we'll do the first bit of the workshop where Carol's talk was going to be, and then we'll have kind of set the discussion questions up to discuss over lunch, and then we'll have a shorter workshop combining it with a break in the afternoon, so hopefully people can get home, can start to leave a little bit earlier there. So that's going to be the plan. So but yes, it's a shame that Carol can't join us. I think that's okay. And the other thing to say is that so we've got Nicola, who's going to join us online in a second, and then your programme says that it's going to be Bill from Learning Science giving a talk, but actually it's going to be the lovely Angela giving that talk, so that's great. I just wanted to say a couple of things from yesterday. So I think, as I say, I think we've come here to learn, we've come here to explore this, difficult conversations, and I was really struck by how much we talked about language yesterday. So I think in Lena's talk, I think she identified it was being one of the barriers to engaging in this space of a fear about language in there. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points, and I organised this meeting to become a better ally and to become someone active in this space. So just a couple of things about language. So we were rightly pointed out yesterday that sometimes our use of language, we have our own, we said to be aware of ignorances and biases. So we were rightly pulled up on, for example, the use of developed versus developing countries. That's not a binary. It's not and it sort of reinforces that hierarchy, which one of the things we're trying to do is to break down these hierarchies. We talked a bit about Sarah in her lovely talk, talks about the importance of language there. And there was a couple of conversations and a couple of things that we just picked up on as organisers of just being careful about use of language and not unnecessarily grouping people. Like, as scientists, we're sort of trained to classify things and put things in groups, but just to be a little bit careful of that. So I'll use an example. So obviously my protected characteristic right now is pregnancy. You wouldn't refer to the pregnants. You'd say pregnant people, pregnant women, pregnant people. And there was just a couple of examples yesterday of people using language in a sort of just shorthand way of, just putting people in a group that sort of removed a little bit of that humanity. So you wouldn't say pregnants, you'd say pregnant people. So if we can make sure that we're doing that when we're thinking about all sorts of different characteristics, that would be great. Because I think the most important thing that we can do here is to learn and to realise, actually, and I'm constantly, some of the language I've used, maybe I'm thinking about that in a slightly different way. Maybe there's a more sensitive way or a more appropriate way to phrase that. So just as a, being a community of people learning from each other, just there. And just another couple of things. Noticed a couple of people just assumed that authors of papers were male, and turns out they weren't. So just maybe check your references, who actually wrote them. Might be a nice thing to do as well, because it's very easy to assume, and it's not always true. So hopefully that's just a couple of things to think about our language, but I think it is so important. We've seen how important language can be for establishing communities, but also for alienating people if we're not sensitive about it. So I just thought I'd flag that on behalf of the organising committee. So without further ado, We are going to go to our first invited speaker of the morning, which is Nicola Hemmings, who is there online, ready for us to join us. So Nicola is going to talk to us about a really nice project they did at the University of Sheffield, contextualising the curriculum in a UKHE bioscience department, challenges and opportunities. So I will hand over to Nicola, who's joining us remotely. So morning, Nicola, lovely to see you.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Well, can we hear Nicola?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Nicola.
Oh, excellent. Okay, thank you.
Brilliant.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk. Thanks also for facilitating it to be online, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to participate, so that was really helpful. I really want to start by just mentioning the other people who were equally involved in this work. I'm presenting this project today on behalf of a much wider group of people. The founding members of our working group that kind of formed this project are listed here, and really everyone has contributed equally to this work, and I'm just, as I say, I'm just kind of presenting this today on behalf of everyone. And I would particularly like to acknowledge Daniela Palmer, who was really the person who spearheaded this project at the start, and brought together people from different parts of our department to really kick this off. And I'm going to give you an introduction to what we've been doing today, but if you do want to learn a bit more, we do have a website that I've put the link for there, so please do feel free to go and have a look. So I'm going to be talking about our work on contextualising the curriculum in ecology and evolution at the University of Sheffield. I want to start, though, by saying a little something about positionality, because positionality is something that we think about a lot in our work within this group. We try to be very aware of our own positionalities, and this framework is something that is borrowed from Dr. Terrell Morton, whose work I was introduced to actually by Daniela Palmer in the first place, and it highlights that our positionality is shaped by our identities, our privileges, our exposure to and or awareness of various issues, our personal and professional commitments, and our actions. So in my case, I'm in terms of my identity, I'm a white, British, cisgendered woman. I'm a mother. I come from a working class background. I was the first person in my family to go to university. Clearly, some of those identities confer privilege in UK society. So in addition to being white and having that university education, which, by the way, was state funded, which is also a privilege, I also am able-bodied. And so these different things really kind of knit into my privilege within society and in terms of academia as well. And I guess these identities also feed into my exposure to and awareness of some of the kind of systems and structures in academia that I have been starting to question within this work. So kind of coming from a non-university, non-academic background, that kind of challenging transition into navigation of the university and academic system, but also whilst here witnessing examples of different forms of oppression within academia, and then learning more about social justice issues, particularly those associated with race, class and gender and their intersections. And by this point, it makes sense to you that this positionality has led to a personal and professional commitment to creating kind of equity and trying to drive a transformative change in academia, which is then actioned through this involvement in this kind of work within the university and beyond. Now, it's important to know that the diverse group of people who have worked on this project all have slightly different positionalities. We've got different identities, we've got different privileges, different exposures, but I think the one thing that we all really converge on is this commitment to justice and a desire for this transformative action. And that's been essential for making, you know, what bit of progress we have managed to make in this area. Now, we call it contextualizing the curriculum, and I'll get to that in a bit, but our work ultimately stems from student and community-led calls to confront racism and inequity in society and in higher education specifically. And those include high-profile movements, which I'm sure most people here have heard of, to decolonize the curriculum, like Rhodes Must Fall and Why Is My Curriculum White? Now, we started out as a reading group in 2019, and the aim was really to educate ourselves about these movements, what it would be like to transform our institution and the field that we study from a critical perspective. And we started by reading this book, Decolonising the University, which I highly recommend if you haven't already read it. And we began to think while we were reading this about how we could apply what we were learning from this book to ecology and evolution. And of course, we were not the first to have done this. Our readings were supplemented by the work of many critical thinkers in our field who had already thought about these issues. Some of those I will reference later, but we also do have a list on that website that I cited earlier. So the fields of ecology and evolution are founded upon natural history, and the term natural history immediately evokes images of glorified explorer types, mostly wealthy European men, traveling around the world, discovering new things, recording them, collecting them, taking credit for them. And I guess what is rarely taught in evolution classes is that these explorers, including natural history heroes like Darwin, profited from slavery, imperialism and colonialism. And they did so in a range of ways, through access to land and biodiversity in colonized places, through imperialist interests in goods that could be obtained from different places around the world, through the extraction of local knowledge, as well as possessions and objects, and through using slave ships and slaves to facilitate their expeditions. And Ray Wing Grant in 2019 article in Science said that for them to participate in this institution, they had to believe science was more important than Black life. Saying that they did it for access is eliminating their responsibility. But it isn't just about knowledge that was acquired in the past. It's about tangible things that we use in our teaching and research now. So in our department, for example, we have a natural history museum. You've probably visited one somewhere. We use ours for teaching purposes, but also for public outreach. Other collections elsewhere are extensively used for research, providing the basis for many high-profile discoveries in the field of evolutionary ecology. Now, the specimens in our museum and others like it were taken from somewhere, and lives were taken in the name of science to build these museums. So our challenge is not only to acknowledge this as teachers and researchers, but also to address this injustice and yield power to those who have been exploited and dispossessed. But that's a very difficult thing to actually do, to enact. And as a group, we felt it was important to remain hyper aware that acknowledging history in our curriculum is just a small first step towards this material goal. So for this reason, following kind of reading and discussion of material such as Tuck and Yang, Decolonisation is not a metaphor, we collectively decided to refer to our work as contextualising the curriculum rather than decolonising. We felt that, well, much of what we do is based upon decolonial theory. Contextualising reflects more accurately what we are doing within our department and avoids misappropriating the term decolonising. So interesting when you were talking about language right at the start, and this is an example of how we felt our use of language would be most appropriately done. So our reading group transitioned somewhat organically into a working group which developed resources for our department. We took an approach which tries to kind of explicitly recognise the sociology and history of the science that we teach and critique how our curriculum and therefore the science that we understand and practice reproduces racism, sexism and other forms of oppression and inequality on a global scale. We also attempt to move beyond a very exclusive kind of typical Eurocentric focus by including non-Western perspectives. We put together a guide that lays out this framework and ways to apply it, teaching and research, which includes priority areas, context for some famous people, and also examples of overlooked and excluded people that haven't become part of the curriculum for various reasons. And this work involved a critical review of our curriculum, which was actually led by undergraduate students. We employed a student to coordinate this and collate the evidence from a wide range of students undertaking modules across the board. This student intermediary was really crucial because, you know, there are some power dynamics between staff and students that means it's much less likely for students to report honestly if we ask them to do it ourselves as staff. We also then went on to deliver workshops within our department to communicate this work to a wider staff body, providing kind of relevant examples that suited different research clusters. And this work has now become an official part of departmental conversations, work and strategy. So for example, early next year, we have a away day really focusing on some of this stuff and looking at the progress that we're making and so on. So what do these curriculum changes look like in practice? Well, I'm going to provide a case study now using our teaching of first year behavioural ecology as an example. Behavioural ecology has really strong links with evolutionary biology, and evolution was identified within our student audit as a priority area to address. And the history of evolutionary biology and genetics is entwined with European imperialism, racism and white supremacy. Many prominent evolutionary biologists and geneticists who helped establish the field were racists and eugenicists. Their theories were used as justification for slavery, for mass slaughter, for the establishment of racist structures that pervade our society today. If you want to learn more about this, I really recommend the book Superior by Angela Saini, which really demonstrates how unobjective science can be. So the need to confront these issues when teaching subjects like evolutionary genetics is clear, but less straightforward perhaps is when we move away from a subject that's been so obviously shaped by colonialism and imperialism into areas like animal behaviour, where on the face of it, you know, these issues might seem less pervasive, and often researchers might assume these issues don't really apply to their work. So we've taken three key approaches to contextualising our animal behaviour curriculum. The first is an easy and kind of low stakes intervention, a systematic audit of the curriculum with respect to diversity and representation. It's a quick and straightforward process, really. We looked specifically at gender and racial background of researchers who were mentioned in lectures. They were almost entirely white and from Europe or the US, and about 75% were men. In our introductory lecture on the history of the study of animal behaviour, that was almost entirely accredited to these three men, Nico Timbergen, Konrad Lorenz, Karl von Frisch. They are routinely described in textbooks and so on as of having founded the field in the mid-1900s. They were very important, but of course our historical perspective requires a broader exploration of earlier ideas that contributed to their thinking. These were not the only people to have made important advances in the field. And a really great example of this, in fact, was highlighted in a paper published in 2020 by Dr. Danielle Lee, who provided a historical account of Charles Henry Turner, an African-American scientist who was a pioneer for the study of animal behavior way back in the early 1900s, some 50 years before Tinbergen wrote his key works. And Charles Henry Turner's story, as the first Black man to receive a PhD from the University of Chicago, just 42 years after the end of slavery in the US, is also an important one to reflect upon in terms of who has and who hasn't been allowed to gain recognition for their work and to create knowledge and legacies in science. The challenges that he faced, which included having little to no access to labs or libraries, limited job opportunities because of segregation laws, meant that he was severely restricted in his ability to do research and produce kind of academic progeny, an academic lineage, which could really shape the discipline. So as well as highlighting people from diverse backgrounds, we're also trying to provide a wider range of perspectives, talking about people whose contributions to the field have been excluded or ignored. And that's not only practicing scientists who we know about, but whose contributions have been largely overlooked, like Turner, but also Indigenous people whose traditional cultural knowledge has been extensively extracted and exploited by Western researchers without credit. But a kind of decolonial approach is not just about counting how many people from different backgrounds are included in your lectures. We think, at least, it's about asking how does your curriculum train students to think critically about the information that they are receiving. And this is really vital in a subject like behavioural ecology, because the traditional ways in which we teach and study animal behaviour are almost exclusively underpinned by classical Western thinking. And also we kind of tend to project human notions of behavioural norms onto animals. So combined with this Western bias means what we're actually projecting is Eurocentric human notions of behavioural norms. We're totally biased about how we expect animals to behave and why. Now, there's been some really fabulous recent critical work by Ambika Kamath, for example, which challenges the use of territoriality as a framework for understanding behaviour. She highlights how it is this idea of territoriality is founded upon human notions of property and ownership that actually don't really apply to most wild animal populations. And she posits that behavioural ecologists often interpret behaviour based on what we think animals should be doing rather than what they actually are doing. And work like this, I think, really highlights the need to develop not just what we teach, but the way that we teach it. So really trying to encourage students to explicitly consider how a Eurocentric view might influence and limit our ability to fully understand animal behaviour and challenge how biases underpin our perception of that behaviour. And there have been several other examples of traditional frameworks for thinking about behaviour which have been similarly challenged in the last couple of years. And I just think these provide a fantastic opportunity to engage students with current debates in the field, encourage deep critical thinking, and create a really stimulating forum for discussion and active learning. And I guess that kind of leads me on to the third crucial step in this process, which is what I kind of call adopting a student-led approach to learning. So there is, I'm sure many people know there's a huge body of evidence that active learning centered around kind of self-directed research, group discussion, really serves to widen participation and engagement with learning across diverse groups of people. There are some controversial topics in the field of behavioural ecology, such as sociobiology, that really lend themselves to this kind of learning approach. So sociobiology introduced to the mainstream kind of ideas about how human nature might be adaptive, and this was the subject of major debate in the 1970s. From many people's perspective, sociobiology serves to naturalize things like racism, aggression, sexism, and although proponents of the field insist that their work is objective, they often miss the point that there's a historical trend of social policy being influenced by shaky theories about human nature. And so these obviously need to be treated with extreme care. Reflecting on this debate and the social context at the time provides an opportunity to kind of explore the politics of science and the scientists themselves. And I hope this will really encourage students to think critically and form their own opinions on these matters. So I guess I hope it's clear that our contextualizing approach isn't just about diversifying the curriculum. It certainly isn't about removing ideas and identities, but more it's a process of enriching the curriculum and learning experience for students, and really encouraging them to develop their own ideas and ultimately free themselves from some of these ingrained biases that pervade the field. So I've talked about what we've done with some examples. I'm going to finish now with a quick reflection on how it's gone, both in terms of some challenges we faced and also the outcomes and opportunities that the work has produced. In general, my experience of doing this work in my department, I'll be completely honest, it's actually been extremely positive. I will highlight some of the great things that have emerged from it in the moment, but I would be remiss not to mention some of the challenges. First of all, there was some resistance from a small but sometimes quite vocal contingent whose main concerns were that, well, primarily that they said they wanted to focus on the science. They didn't want to bring politics into it. However, we argue that science is inherently political. If we ignore that context, then we risk getting things seriously wrong. So rather than bringing politics into it, it's actually a case of not ignoring or avoiding the fact that it's there and thinking really critically about how it influences what we think we know. And in addition, we know our students are motivated about these sorts of issues and questions. So really, it's an opportunity for engagement. We've also been the subject of some poor right-wing journalism by the Daily Mail and Telegraph, resulting in our fortunately highly supportive head of department having to spend a couple of days fielding emails on our behalf and emphasizing the importance of this work to other people. I've put this under challenges, but actually several positive things came from this, including lots of support on social media from several high-profile people, lots of positive interest generated in our work, and not to mention our students who are really supportive as well. Now, I suppose it also goes without saying that this work takes time and energy. I'm sure everyone here knows that. Often the people who care the most about this work, the most to spend the necessary time doing it, are perhaps the ones who can afford to the least. You might have noticed that more than half of our original working group were either PhD or early career researchers on insecure contracts. The project was founded by a postdoc working on a short-term contract. 10 out of 12 of the members were women. There are tangible career costs to doing this work instead of spending the same time writing papers or grant applications, not to mention the potential stress of dealing with resistant senior colleagues. The career benefits are perhaps less tangible, although on the positive side, I do think that at least in my institution, this work is now beginning to get more of the recognition that it deserves. There have, however, been a whole raft of positive outcomes from this work. These are a few quotes from staff who engage with our workshops. As I said, the majority of our colleagues are fully on board and have really, taken hold of doing this work. Changes have been made to over 20 modules because of this process. We've overseen the development and incorporation of several new lectures at undergrad and master's level. Members of our working group have given talks to other universities, and elements of our guide have been used centrally in the university to develop an inclusive curriculum toolkit. A few specific examples: earlier this year, a science communication master's student, Becky Ford, undertook a brilliant critical review of the colonial history of our Alfred Denny Museum. She produced a new display that features prominently now in our building, developed new content as well for our public tours, the feedback from which has been excellent. Although not directly linked to our own work, 2 PhD members of our original working group went on to spearhead a guide for PhD researchers, responding to a desire from the PGR community to engage with this work, but not necessarily kind of knowing how to apply it to their own research. This is a brilliant piece of critical work. It's available on the website that I've put the link to here if you want to take a look and share it, you know, with other postgrad researchers. And then finally, by being part of this work, several of our group members have become part of wider networks of people interested in this transformative change within the university and academia more widely. And this has led to other projects and initiatives. For me personally, this has meant becoming part of a large-scale project to address racial justice issues in PGR study. And this has helped to form the new Centre for Equity and Inclusion at Sheffield. So from starting a reading group 3 years ago, there really has been quite a ripple effect of this work, and it's one that I am confident we will see continue to grow. So I'm just going to go back to this slide to finish, to reiterate that this has been the work of many, and I've been privileged to be part of it. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, that was really nice, and I really like the practical emphasis of sort of bringing the theory and the sort of implementation together. Do we have any questions for Nicola, either online or in the room? I can't see the chat. I don't know if anyone's can monitor the chat for me. Any questions in the room, or we just get this ourselves sorted out online? Yeah, have we got any online questions? So I guess my question then, Nicola, is, so you've obviously taken an emphasis in the ecology and evolution space, and I think that's really nice. We talked quite a lot about more human-centric sort of biomedical examples yesterday, which was great. I wondered how, you know, in terms of that sort of ripple effect, so it's clearly, you know, ecology and evolution's had that. Have there been then ripples to other disciplines within Sheffield? Have people picked up on it? And which, if there has, then which disciplines have gone for it?
Yeah, so yeah, it's a good question actually, because this work actually started when we were still called the Department of Animal and Plant Sciences, and in these last couple of years while we've been doing this work, our department has merged with 2 other biology departments to form the School of Biosciences. And one of the challenges that we've faced is actually, you know, trying to broaden this approach so that now it can be applied across our entire school. And I think we are still kind of grappling with that. We've made some progress, but part of the reason we're actually having you know, in early next year, we're having an away day focusing on this is because we really want to try and broaden this out beyond our kind of research cluster based approach. So, you know, we're making some progress within kind of broader biology. What I would say is we do also know that there are different pockets across the university where this kind of work has been going really well as well. So for example, in geography, they've been doing a lot of work in this area, also in the arts and humanities as well. And one thing that has emerged is I've talked about some of the networks, and we've got a network now across the university so people can share ideas and kind of learning, I guess, and experiences. And we've done this, it's kind of a digital format. So we've got a kind of online space where we can share things and communicate with other people. And that's one of the ways in which we formed this group to take on this other kind of big project that we're working on now. So there are ways of doing this, but obviously, yeah, it is challenging to apply something like this more broadly when you really know about your kind of narrow field and the way it affects that field. So yeah, it takes a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, that's great. And it's great to hear about those sort of more sustainable groups coming together of, because often this work is, someone has a good idea and they do a really good piece of work and then it disappears. So that kind of continuing network stuff, I think is great. Any other questions either from the room or from online? Is there anything online? I think so. No? In that case, can we just thank Nicola once again for a really, really interesting talk? Thank you. Brilliant. In that case, Angela, if you'd like to come across. Oh, there's a question. Sorry, there is a question. It's an online question. Yeah, can I just get a microphone on Eniola? So here, pick that one up. Sorry. Is Mariam there? Yes, Mariam. Hello.
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me?
Sorry. Yes, we can. Thank you, Mariam.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Nicola, for this brilliant presentation. I was interested in the student-led approach and thinking of any tangible approaches to initiate students to kind of challenge the information they are being given. And I was just wondering if you, I know you mentioned it takes time really to come up with some strategy into how, like a transformative strategy to our classical teaching. But I was wondering whether you already came into some tips and hints and some ideas that could already be experimented somehow. Like, I don't know, would, for example, giving small research projects to students and giving them full independence into how they're gonna approach these questions or come up with a hypothesis or something. Would this, for example, this kind of free, not so much interfering with their work, would it be the way, for example, to go for?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's really hard to actually know, the most effective ways of doing this work. I think, what you've suggested, get small groups given a bit of freedom to explore their own ideas, always works really well. I try to always do that, especially in kind of first and second year when students are doing kind of tutorial projects and things, to give them that scope. But really what I've been doing, within particular modules, is really trying to encourage students to read particular articles, and I try to find quite accessible articles that that they are going to be interesting to them, but also that they are going to kind of feel able to tackle from the offset. And I also set up a kind of very small group discussion approach. So I really, even though some of these classes are quite big, what you can do is get them to kind of discuss what they have read in relatively small groups, even pairs. And I always find that small group discussion or pair discussion really then facilitates a broader discussion, because I think that some of my students at least quite like being able to kind of test out their ideas on their peers before they dare to say something out to the whole group. And I think that kind of supportive environment where they're working in small groups, they're exploring ideas together, just gives them a little bit more confidence to be able to then talk about some of the things that they're thinking more widely. So I really think, like you mentioned before, small groups, I think doing small group work is really important. I think encouraging students to read broadly, but also being very clear about what that reading should be, because I think a lot of students don't, you can't just say, go and read some of this stuff. That it actually needs to be a little bit more directed at first, so that they are confident that they're reading something that's relevant, and then just kind of slowly guiding it from there, and having the time to let those discussions happen. I often find that our kind of classes are too short in a way. We don't get time to kind of settle in and really talk about this stuff and have time to just generally discuss. But I think trying to build some of that time in, even if it means that some other stuff has to move aside for it, I think that's worthwhile, because I do think this kind of critical thinking and discussion is a really important part of the learning process.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Marion, for the question, and Nicola